Today we're going to be looking at changing fractions to decimals again, and this is part 2 of the series. This one is still relatively simple in the process, but it's not going to be just memorizing fractions and changing them to decimals. We're going to be using 3 different skills to do this. The first is going to be saying the fraction in the proper manner. The second part of our process is listening to what you're saying. So you're going to be saying the fraction out loud, listening to what you are saying, and then you are simply just writing what you are hearing, except you're writing it in the decimal version. So being able to properly read fractions and properly write your decimals is going to be how we are successfully changing fractions to decimals today. So first we're going to look at 3/10. And the proper way to read this is 3/10. Now that I have said 3/10 and I have heard 3/10, I can now write it in its decimal or numeric version, 3/10. So simply by saying, listening, and writing, I've changed my 3/10 to 0.3, changing fractions to decimals. Now let's try one on your own. So when we see this fraction 6/10, I know that the tenths place is a place value. So I can listen to this of 6/10, and I know that I can successfully write that as a decimal. I have my number 6, and it is in the tenths place, so this would be 6/10. So let's try one on your own. Please read this number, listen to what you are reading, and write it as a decimal. Pause it. When you come back, I will show you the answer. We have the number 7/10. So I can write 7/10. Now as we're working today, hopefully you can try to pick up on the pattern of the types of fractions that we can read to successfully change to decimals. This is not going to work all the time. It's only going to work for certain fractions. And you should think about the decimal place values that we have and the numbers that you're reading and the way that we write them. So for example, 2/8. Saying that I can't write 2/8 as a decimal because eighths is not a decimal place value. So we looked at tenths first. The next decimal place value that we have would be hundredths. So here we have 54 hundredths. As I say that, I can visualize the decimal or the numeric way of writing this. 54 hundredths is, as you can see there, 54 hundredths or 0.54. So again, I have converted from a fraction to a decimal. So we're going to look at another example of hundredths just to make sure we're writing them properly. So here we can see 5/100, 5 hundredths would be the proper way to read that number. I've read the number, I've listened to the number, and now I can successfully write it as a decimal. 0.05. Remember, when you're reading numbers with decimals, you say the last place value. So if I were to write just 0.5, that would be 5/10. This, as you can see, is 5 hundredths. Now let's try a couple more on your own. Looking at our next place value, we can still listen to this. So go ahead and listen to the fraction that you're reading and try to write it as a decimal. Pause the video so when you come back you can see the answer. When I read this, I have the number 79 hundredths. And so I can write this as 79 hundredths. Notice the 9 is in the hundredths place, so I know that I am correct. Here's another practice. Read the fraction and write it as a decimal. Pause so you can come back to check the answer. This one is 8 hundredths. Now I have to remember that I can only write the number 8, but right now This would be 8/10ths because the 8 is in the tenths place. I can't add a 0 on the end because that would be 80 hundredths. I need 8 hundredths. So if I add my 0 before, I now still have the number 8, and it is in the hundredths place, so it would be 8 hundredths. So remember, we're thinking about the pattern of types of decimals that we could use this saying, listening, writing strategy. As I said before, 2/8 would be an example of something that we can't listen to and write because eighths is not a place value. We've done tenths, we've done hundredths, so our next place value, if you can think about it, would be the hundredths. So if we have a fraction, it would be thousandths. If we have a fraction over 1,000, I should be able to read this, listen, and write. So I can see 638 thousandths. So when I say that, we have 638 thousandths, and now I can successfully write it numerically. 0.638 would be 638, 8 being in the thousandths, 638 thousandths. So we can successfully try this, and now you can practice on your own. This is our last practice problem. Read this number out loud, listen to it, and then write the number that you are hearing. I'm going to give you a little clue. Make sure you are careful with your number placement, thinking about your place values. Go ahead and pause, come back to check the answer. I can see that I have 57 thousandths, and so I know I need to write the number 57. But as you can see right now, I have the 7 in the tenth hundredths place, so that is not correct. I can't add a 0 on the end because then it would be 570. So I stick my 0 in the front, and I can see that I have now still 57. My 7 is in the thousandths place, so 57 thousandths. So we can use this strategy to read, write, and convert fractions to decimals. So remember, part 2, changing fractions to decimals, we are using 3 simple strategies. We are saying our fraction, listening to what we are saying, and writing what we are saying. When we use these 3 strategies, we can successfully change some fractions to decimals. It doesn't work for all of them, but if it's ending in it, if it has a denominator of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, all of these that are place values, we can say it, listen, and write it.